Hello, good morning. It's Thursday, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Welcome to our programme. We are only 5 days away from that crucial Commons vote when the Prime Minister will try to get her Brexit deal approved by MPs. Theresa May says it's her deal or no deal. So what would a no-deal Brexit look like? And what would it mean for you?
I'm an entrepreneur, and so a no deal for me would mean more expense to pass on to my customers and a nightmare for my business.
I work in aviation, and a no-deal Brexit would mean opportunity, not a crisis for businesses and ordinary people up and down the country.
As an EU citizen and someone that works in the car industry, no deal will be a disaster.
For the UK fishing industry, Brexit is a sea of opportunity. A no deal would bring that on more quickly.
We'll hear more from our voters in the next hour of the programme, and also from you, wherever you are in the country. Do get in touch this morning. Meanwhile, Britain's biggest car manufacturer, Jaguar Land Rover, is to cut up to 5,000 jobs in the UK. That's about 1 in 8 of the workforce. It says it's because of falling demand in China, confusion over diesel cars and uncertainty over Brexit. And one of the protesters who's been criticised for verbally abusing the Conservative MP Anna Soubry as she walked into Parliament earlier this week has told this programme exclusively he will keep harassing her and others if they don't get the Brexit they want.
Compare us with Joe Cott's killer, that's out of order. But I wouldn't,
But people are concerned.
I know, yeah.
She was scared.
I know, no, she was laughing. She was laughing. She wouldn't come out yesterday and done it all, would she? She thought, she knew we was all over there.
Hello, welcome to the programme. Good morning. We're live until 11 this morning, and we are talking about what happens if there is a no-deal Brexit. Now, that is the term used to describe Britain leaving the European Union with no formal agreement on the terms of the withdrawal or new trade relations. And we're going to talk about how it will affect you and your life. Thank you for your messages on Twitter so far. @the13men says, don't worry, your lot won't let Brexit happen. Relax. @KittyCat99 says, to be honest, I'm more worried about making ends meet being on universal credit. And Roy Adams tweets this, no deal is the default option and I would willingly accept it rather than Mrs May's fudge deal. But I'm not sure the morons in Parliament could get out of a wet paper bag, let alone deliver Brexit. Getting in touch, you're very welcome. Wherever you are in the UK, use the hashtag Victoria Live. If you're emailing, it's victoria@bbc.co.uk, and there's Facebook and text as well. First, the news. Here's Anita.
Thank you, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. Britain's biggest car maker, Jaguar Land Rover, is planning to cut around an eighth of its UK workforce, with up to 5,000 jobs expected to be lost. Management, marketing and administrative roles are expected to be hardest hit, but it's understood some production staff may also be affected. Industry insiders are blaming a downturn in Chinese sales, a slump in demand for diesel cars and uncertainty over Brexit. The government says it will work to help find new jobs for the affected staff.
There's high demand for people that have had the experience of working in such a fantastic company. And so across government and with the leaders like the Mayor of the West Midlands, we'll work very closely with the company, with employees, to make sure that we can match them with other companies that are expanding that would give the right teeth to have the brilliant employees that JLR have employed.
Business Secretary Greg Clark. The government may back calls to protect workers' rights after Brexit to help win support for Theresa May's deal from Labour MPs in next week's crucial Brexit vote. The proposals have been put forward by pro-Brexit Labour MP John Mann, who says his amendment would open up the opportunity for other improvements to the Prime Minister's deal. Meanwhile, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will say later that a general election is the only way to break the Brexit deadlock and overcome the country's divisions. At a speech in Wakefield, Mr Corbyn will argue that if the Prime Minister is unable to get her deal through Parliament next week, her government will have lost all authority. Labour's deputy leader Tom Watson told ITV's Peston programme that it's a question of when, not if, Labour tabled a vote of no confidence in the government. Police believe they've found the car used to knock 14-year-old Jayden Moody off a moped in East London before he was stabbed to death. Detectives say 3 men used a black Mercedes to ram into the teenager before killing him in a targeted attack in Leighton. Officers have increased patrols in the area, including at local schools. Retailers have reported significant falls in sales over the festive season as the sector suffers its worst Christmas in 10 years. Struggling department store Debenhams saw a 5.7% fall in like-for-like sales over the festive period, with M&S and Sainsbury's also suffering. Other retailers, such as Tesco and John Lewis, said their Christmases had been stronger. Women taking certain types of hormone replacement therapy tablets could be more at risk from serious blood clots, according to new research. The study in the British Medical Journal said that despite the overall risk being low, HRT patches and gels were the safest form of treatment. GPs leaders said women shouldn't panic or stop taking HRT, which is used to relieve symptoms of the menopause, but should raise any concerns with their GP. The actress Ashley Judd's sexual harassment lawsuit against Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein has been dismissed. But the court in Los Angeles did say the star could proceed with another part of her civil claim, namely that Mr. Weinstein defamed her and damaged her career. Mr. Weinstein has denied all allegations of non-consensual sex. And that is a summary of our main news this morning. Back to you, Victoria.
6 minutes past 10. Hello, it's Thursday already. Robert says this: time to leave with no deal. We can make deals once we've left. Stop using the phrase crashing out. I never have. No one knows what will happen. It's pure speculation and manipulation. We need to have self-belief and drive this wonderful this wonderful country onwards to greater things. Russell says this: I can think it's naive to think that those that voted leave did not consider that a no-deal scenario meant being worse off. But many, like I, voted for change, and whatever that brings, with the belief and confidence that Britain will long-term be better for it. There's far too much media negativity and spin on this, and the man on the street is prepared to ride the bumps and, God forbid, go back to seasonal veg and holidays in the UK. Benedict says, I voted to leave, but I didn't vote for a no-deal Brexit. Please, will you stop the Brexit spokespeople assuming that all the 17.4 million who voted to leave voted for the same reasons? We didn't. And Catherine tweets, we'd be the only country in the world without any trading relationships with any other countries overnight. It would be criminal for any government to implement this. So we're focusing on what a no deal would mean for you this morning. Wherever you are in the UK, do get in touch. We're going to talk to various voters here who are part of our Brexit brunch, and we've got some MPs as well. So what might a no-deal Brexit mean for you? Under a no-deal Brexit, Britain would leave the European Union with no formal agreement on the terms of the withdrawal or new trade relations. So do you actively want a no deal? Are you dreading it? Let me know today. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about it this morning because, as you know, the UK is due to leave the European Union in 78 days' time and counting. And we still don't know on what terms. Most think MPs will vote against the government's Brexit deal next Tuesday, which means leaving the EU without a deal at all at the end of March becomes a real possibility. Although if Mrs May does lose that vote next week, we now know she'll have to come back with her Plan B within 3 days, not 21 days. So her strategy of forcing her MPs to choose between her deal and no deal as the clock ticks down to March the 29th, the deadline for Brexit, has kind of been dismantled now. What can happen now is that Parliament, all 650 MPs, will be able to have a series of votes, and by a process of elimination, they'll be able to determine what option is most popular. A different kind of Brexit, a second referendum, and so on and so on. But what might a no-deal Brexit actually mean? Have a look at this.
Our relationship with the EU has been built over 40 years through treaties, rules and regulations. Under no deal, that would all be stripped away and we would fall back immediately on wider international law. Both the EU and the UK have published plans saying how they'll manage in the short term in areas like aviation. If EU law is enforced, though, border checks will be reimposed straight away and firms will have to pay a tariff to import or export goods. Road haulage firms have warned of long delays at Britain's ports. The rights of EU citizens living here and UK citizens living in mainland Europe would be less clear. No one would be forced to leave, but the right to healthcare and some other benefits could be restricted. EU rules also affect things like pet passports, driving licences and mobile phone charges. Under no deal, they may all have to be renegotiated. Some, though, think no deal will mean we don't have to pay the EU a huge divorce bill for leaving. People who like the idea also say it lets businesses know where they stand and will make it possible to strike trade agreements with other countries outside of Europe. So how likely is it to happen? Well, bookmakers now put the odds of a no-deal Brexit at 3-1. A group of MPs in Parliament is trying hard to block that option, but leaving the EU on March 29th is written into law. So as things stand, that is what will happen, with or without a deal.
So this morning, we're going to hear from our Brexit bunch, who are our guests this morning, people we've gathered from all over the UK, we've talked to on regular intervals, as the twists and turns of Brexit continue. We've also got politicians here. Vicky Ford is a Conservative MP. She's a former MEP, and she is going to be voting for the government's Brexit deal next Tuesday, the deal Mrs May has negotiated with Brussels. Simon Clarke is here. He's also a Conservative MP, and he's a senior figure in the Eurosceptic group, the European Research Group. He'd be happy with a no deal, and he thinks that the fears about no deal Brexit are exaggerated. And Rupa Huck is here. She's a Labour MP. She will vote against Mrs May's deal next Tuesday as well. We had booked Shadow Brexit Minister Jenny Chapman. She had to pull out at the last minute because of a diary clash, so Rupa Huck stood in at the last minute, and we're grateful for that. Thank you, all of you. OK, so who actively wants a no deal? Do you introduce yourself? Tell us why.
I'm Jeff Nicholas. I'm from South Wales. I work in a factory manufacturing alarm systems. I had a chat, I got to say this, I had a chat with with the purchasing manager at the factory, and he said that at the moment there is uncertainty, and that's why the components are not getting through, and the politicians need to get their act together. It's them we're waiting for. We can trade on WTO rules. No deal is, I don't like the term no deal. WTO is what it is. It's a new trade deal with the rest of the world. Bring it on.
Who agrees with that? Bring it on. Do introduce yourself, Bertie.
Sorry, it's Bertie Armstrong, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. You refer to us as voters. I actually represent a whole trade sector here, turning over £500 million a year, and speaking for the whole UK industry, because we are as one here. It's straight and clean for the UK fishing industry. Taking back sovereignty over our waters will right the wrongs of a long time. And it's the one area where north, south, east and west, all parties agree that fishing should be out of the common fisheries policy.
And you would get that with Mrs May's deal, she says.
We would, but there would be a transition period. Now, we accepted that. We would weather that. That would be the period of negotiation. What would happen in a no deal is there would be immediate sovereignty, and the deal-making conditions would be really rather more severe for the rest of Europe than they are now. We need to look forward, not back. We need to recognise the volume of opportunity for UK fishing, not just for the economics and the jobs, but because it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
We're an island in the middle of the best fishing grounds in the world. Why would we trade that away?
No deal means no transition. Who else thinks that would be a good idea, or who thinks that would absolutely decimate potentially their livelihood? Do you introduce yourself?
I'm from Hull, basically. So Hull was an ex-fishing town with a vast fishing fleet. And I sympathise with what you're saying, and I hope you actually get what you want. But personally, I think a no deal with no transition period, how would you get your fish onto the continent? Because logistically, it's going to be impossible.
But before you answer that, Bertie, you can answer that. But Kevin, just explain what you do for a living and why you really cannot envisage a no-deal scenario, because it would be bad for your staff,
for your an international haulage business. For the last 45 years, all we've done is import and export UK, Europe, back into the UK again. And a no deal with hard borders, full customs formalities, would be an absolutely disaster for my business.
Can you explain why? In practical terms, what difference does it make if, for example, one of your 104 lorries gets stopped for a bit longer than it gets stopped now?
Waiting, costly waiting. Clients obviously have deadlines to meet with manufacturing, whether that be automotive or whether it be aviation or whether it be foodstuffs or anything else. My major concern is clarity. Everybody's saying at the moment it's 300 odd days to Christmas. You said it was 77 days to Brexit.
I said 78, am I wrong?
78?
It
Oh,
might
wow,
be,
we've got an extra day.
I did count up on my calendar this morning.
And come the revolution next week, it's going to be, what, 70 days? We've been talking, I have been talking, I sit on a steering panel at the Department for Transport with Chris Grayling and others, and we've been talking about this for a year and a half, and we still haven't got any clarity.
OK.
And there isn't time.
I'm going to introduce you to Simon Clarke. He's a Conservative MP. He's going to vote against Mrs May's deal.
I am, yes.
Yes. Well, and so you believe the worries around a no deal are exaggerated, but you've heard it from Kevin's mouth this morning. What do you say to him?
Well, I think the most important thing to say is that we heard from the president of the Calais-Boulogne ports earlier this week in what was a really powerful interview on BBC Radio 4.
The Deputy Mayor of Calais.
Indeed, and he was setting out very, very clearly that in a no-deal scenario, which is not inevitable, there is still scope to get a deal through the House, but in that scenario, that there would indeed be no additional delays relative to those which exist at present. Well, in truth...
If there's 70 seconds delay in a vehicle clearing customs and leaving the Port of Dover, there will be 3,000 vehicles within 70 seconds in a queue coming out of the Port of Dover.
And Kevin, you're absolutely right that we do not want to see additional friction at the borders, but that presupposes that the French are indeed going to generate that extra friction, and we've heard now from the port operators that they won't.
We have German clients, we have Belgian clients and Dutch clients.
Yeah.
And
they won't do it.
The Belgians and Dutch are Brexit ready. Can you say the same? Because
the
Belgians and Dutch are telling us they're Brexit ready. The French are saying it's your problem, and so they're not Brexit ready. We transit the Port of Dover and Calais daily, maybe about 10, 12 trucks per day, and there is no extra facilities in either port, and there's no space for any extra facilities in either port.
OK. I'm going to pause there because I want to bring more people in to do a sort of general overview about...
There's one very important
Bertie, I'm going to
point.
come back to you. I absolutely promise.
Thank you.
I want a sort of more general overview at this time. We're going to come back to trade, do not worry. People who are worried about a no-deal Brexit, people who actively want a no-deal Brexit. Who's worried? Yes, Derry.
So I have come from Northern Ireland and I'm representing our future Choice Northern Ireland, so we're campaigning for a people's vote. The thought of a no-deal Brexit in Northern Ireland is absolutely disastrous. I've been speaking to young people across Northern Ireland who are looking at massive amounts of uncertainty. Northern Ireland had 20 years of uncertainty, of violence and strife on the streets. We don't want that again. I haven't grown up with that. And the thought that a no-deal Brexit could put a border back up and that people are going to be facing the same violence and anger of the past is not something that I want.
So do you think there is a real possibility of a hard border being imposed, pretty much immediately, if there's a no deal after March the 29th?
Well, you know, we're looking at, there's been 1,000 extra police officers recruited to be put on the streets in Northern Ireland if there is a no-deal Brexit. And I think, you know, there has to be some form of border put up there. There's a land border between the European Union and then what will be a non-European Union country. Goods crossing that border will need to be checked, and whether or not that's with cameras or some form of infrastructure, there will need to be infrastructure put up there. And there are people who are living on the border, that's where I live, who don't want that back and who will use violence as a means to get rid of that. It's not something that anybody in Northern Ireland wants, be that violence or checks on the border. And a no deal would just spell disaster for the future of Northern Ireland.
Harry, would you sacrifice the Good Friday Agreement, as Derry has just been explaining that she's worried about, in order to have a no deal, which you said would be exciting for Britain?
It will be exciting. I mean, the way it's coming across, and I expect more from the younger generation, that it's all very negative and very doom and gloom. And
but did you hear what Derry just said?
I did hear what she said, and I've been to Northern Ireland many a times, but the general consensus I get there is that there is an exciting opportunity for change, and it's the way forward. We're hearing one side of it, again, a very negative...
But Harry, you don't live there.
A negative scaremongering
You don't live there.
approach.
You don't live on the border. You haven't spoken to students who cross the border, go into school and are frightened that their bus won't be able to get across the border.
Every day through Heathrow Airport, where I work, I speak to people on both sides of the border, and several times a day. And this is what I'm trying to get across, that Heathrow is Europe's biggest port. They're ready. Flights aren't going to get grounded. That's how it's been sold, that flights are going to get grounded. We're talking about 200,000 passengers plus a day, 78 million. So Are
you sure about that? Because we saw what a couple of drones could do.
Well, drones aside, so agreements have been put in place. So aircraft can fly, can land and take off, and And it works both ways. That's what we're forgetting here. We might have the odd teething problem, as in more security measures, if the EU doesn't recognise our safety standards. But one very, very important point I need to make is that, like I said, I speak to big business people from all around the world on a daily basis, and they see us as a free trading nation. The excitement is out there for us to grow as a nation. So let's stop this doom and gloom. Those 304 on Tuesday's vote, they need to have a good look at the mirror, because they're disrupting this whole process for self-gain.
Sorry, those what? Say that
Those
again.
304 that voted on Tuesday
I see.
for the
Yes,
amendment.
just gone.
They've got their own personal agendas going on, and it's not for the nation, by the sounds of it.
Elena, you've been raising your eyebrows sitting next to Harry. I'm guessing that you're dreading a no deal.
Well, I'm an EU citizen. I'm German. I've lived here for the best part of 10 years of my life. And first of all, I'd like to say that for 2.5 years since the referendum, us EU citizens have been left in limbo by Mrs May and the entire UK government. If no deal happens, that will continue.
No. She's already.
No, she hasn't. Let me finish, because I am actually affected, so I know what I'm talking about on the matter.
And then I'll tell you my side of it.
We are having to apply, not register, for settled status, which is entirely unnecessary. In June last year, the EU put forward the first proposal, which said anyone that's in the EU as a Brit today and anyone that's in the UK as an European today, we will ring-fence their rights, and then any new immigrants coming beyond Brexit will have a new immigration law. Britain rejected that. It put up a system called settled status. The trials that ran in December were open to 250,000 people, and 12,500 out of 15,000 applications have actually been granted. 20% of applications are citizens that are here legally, that are people's wives, mothers, husbands, carers. All those things, those people have been rejected. You tell me how that's going.
Right. On the flip side of that, Heathrow, I can talk about personally, are paying...
On the Heathrow
Hang on,
subject.
I'm a human, I'm not Heathrow.
No.
You're
a human. Listen, on the Heathrow subject, we've literally just had this from the International Air Transport Association's Director General and Chief Exec. Measures to allow flights to continue between the European Union and Britain in the event of a disorderly Brexit are unlikely to be enough to avoid some disruptions and cancellations. And that's according to, what's his name? Doesn't leave his name, but anyway, he's the boss of the International Air Transport Association. We are a bit worried because the first guidelines have been issued, he said, and I think represent a constraint on traffic. Vicky Ford, how well do you know Theresa May?
Well, I know her to be an enormously resilient woman, OK, and she listens very hard.
Those who know her reasonably well say they cannot imagine her allowing a scenario whereby the UK leaves the EU without a deal on March the 29th. What would you say?
I will certainly be supporting her.
Of course you will, but what do you think she'll do?
So let's just talk about the vote that's in front of us now first. So I will be supporting this deal because I believe, and I played a very active role as a Remainer in the last referendum. I warned about the risks both to our trade and our security and jobs and people's lives, as we've heard. But the Brexiteers promised that those deals would be addressed. They promised there would be a trade deal. Germans would want to sell us their cars. They promised there'd be a trade deal. And the WTO does not cover key sectors that are important in my constituency, like services. Lots of people work in services. They work in the tech sector. They work in areas like science and research, advanced manufacturing, the car industry. We've heard about those Jaguar Land Rover jobs today going to Slovakia.
Right.
Okay, Slovakia.
I can just see your Conservative colleague
I will be supporting this deal. There are some risks. There's some concern about the Northern Ireland backstop becoming permanent. I don't see that as a big risk because it's in neither side's interest.
OK.
I'm
we are
hoping
here today
over the
to
weekend,
focus on what a no deal would look like.
No deal would mean uncertainty in financial services, which is the biggest employer in my constituency, uncertainty in advanced manufacturing, the car industry, uncertainty for the EU citizens, my constituents who are married to EU citizens. That is why I'm voting for this transition period to allow us to get to a trade relationship.
Simon Clark, your Conservative colleague, and then Rupert. Simon Clark, desperate to get in. You disagree?
First to say that obviously we had a referendum which settled the issue of whether we were leaving or remaining in the EU.
Let's talk about no no deal.
But to talk about no deal, so for example, Vicky singles out the services industry. Well, the single market in Europe already doesn't cover the services
Covers
industry.
financial services.
There's no question that in the end, this country has to choose between being a rule taker and a rule maker. And the ultimate uncertainty in a scenario where a deal were approved would be that we would be locked in as a rule taker under the backstop, unable to shape our laws.
Only if we end up in a backstop.
Well, and I think we would be highly likely. No, of course we don't know that. But that is
only if we
that is a very significant contingent risk. And I'm a parliamentarian elected to make choices, and it seems to me very, very clear that the balance of risk lies against signing up to a backstop which is unlimited in time and duration.
I mean, the terminology is confusing. Some of the polling even shows that when this phrase is bandied about, no deal is better than a bad deal, a lot of the general public, in fact, even thinks that means the status quo. Do you know what I mean? We won't have any deal. A bad deal is worse. However, WTO really is the worst of all worlds because we've got to disentangle ourselves from 40-plus years of cooperation and legislative entanglements with our nearest neighbours, colleagues, friends. It's a bit like taking taking an egg out of a cake that's already baked. Do you know what I mean? It's really difficult to do this, so it's not going to be easy. And WTO is crashing out with no transition period. At least the 2 years that the government's deal offered would mean that there's continuity with arrangements that we have.
You're going to vote against that.
Right. The reason I'm going to vote against it is it's a bad deal. That's what's on the table.
So how are you going to stop a no deal?
Why are we having this discussion at all? It's because our government has failed. That referendum was in June 2016.
So
we've got 78 days to go, or whatever it is.
My question to you, Rupert, and I know you're not representing your shadow front bench, but as a Labour MP who doesn't want a no deal, what are you going to try and do to stop it?
Well, I mean, the thing is, she's holding a gun to our heads.
I'm asking about you.
Yeah, OK, so I voted for the amendment. I think there's some misunderstanding of what that meant. There's been 2 government defeats in 2 days. We've had a government that's been held in contempt of Parliament. That's never happened historically before. We're in weird, unprecedented times. But I mean, there is no parliamentary will for a no-deal Brexit. So we voted for an amendment that actually makes budget decisions contingent on no deal. If a no deal comes, we're not going to allow any money for that. That's the will of Parliament.
I'm asking you how you're going to stop a no deal.
Yeah,
that's an amendment that might come into force.
No, the point is that Parliament needs to assert itself because we've got a minority government. They didn't win an election. 2 years of time wasting, 8 weeks of that was fanning around, having a general election that they wasted. We're getting near the clock. She's trying to blackmail people into saying this Hobson's choice, her way or the highway. Okay. There are other options. MPs can decide. My personal preference is for a people's vote. People decided this. Let's give it back to them. Let's see, do you want this deal or do you want to remain? Because we know what that looks like. Right. We know that works. The best deal that we have is the best deal there is on offer is the one that we have. It works.
Can I come back in?
In a moment, Vicky Ford, because we're going to move on to talk more specifically about trade and the economy, if we may. The implications of a no-deal Brexit could be huge for how our economy might fare in the future. Have a look at this.
A no-deal Brexit could have big implications for trade. For some, it's like driving the economy off a cliff. For others, it's a glorious opportunity. It's impossible to know for sure, but here are some arguments either way. If we leave with no deal, the EU says there can be no transition period. That means we would leave the single market straight away, so any goods that cross the UK border may face extra checks and tariffs. Haulage firms are worried about long queues at the ports. There are concerns over food. The government says trucks will continue rolling into the UK, but could our food exports be delayed going in the other direction? On medicine, we import and export millions of packs of drugs each month. The government has asked firms to stockpile a 6-week supply just in case. The world of finance is worried about losing access to European markets. Manufacturers, now used to bringing in parts quickly, might have to adjust quickly, holding more on site and investing in new storage facilities. On the other side, something leaving on WTO terms would free us up, putting us in a position to negotiate a better long-term trade deal with the EU. It may also make it more simple to strike our own agreements with other fast-growing countries like China or Brazil. The bigger question is how all this could affect the economy over time. An analysis by the government found a no-deal Brexit could leave it 9% smaller than it would have been by 2034. Most economists think that analysis is fair, but some Brexiteers have described those figures as flawed.
Well, leaving with no deal would mean we leave and use World Trade Organization terms, which Jim mentioned in that piece, which means tariffs added to goods coming in and going out. On average, those tariffs are pretty low, 2.6% added to the cost of imports and exports, rising to, on average, 10% for cars and car parts. For dairy products, they rise to, on average, over 35%. Do you think people who advocate a no deal, do you know those tariffs? Are you aware of what would go on to goods? And do you think people would be able to afford an extra 35% on dairy products, for example, Bertie?
We do. For shellfish, which should be the item where it was most applied, it's about 8%. Currency variations swallow that up one way or the other. So that would be perfectly copable with. The seafood is a global market.
There's a lady next to you who's Bindi, who's really...
I understand that. Seafood is a global market. We have an opportunity to double the amount of seafood, our own natural capital, that we take from our own waters under the sovereignty granted by Brexit. When that happens, there's the possibility of a real expansion. It is the sea of opportunity. And there'll be challenges. But the critical path is the opportunity. And we have a lot of argument which can't see beyond the challenges and doesn't address the challenges. It says we're all going to die, we should go back to where we started. Well, nonsense.
That's not true,
why
though,
Hull
is it?
died in the first place.
For example, Karen, Bindi, John, Kevin, you run businesses. What do you think about these potential tariffs being imposed in a no-deal scenario? What would it mean for your business, Karen?
The costs that will be incurred will be passed on to the customer. And as an entrepreneur and with the product that I design, at the moment, I'm at a standstill. I've been at a standstill for nearly 2 years. I can't launch a product without knowing what my cost to the customer is going to be.
Bindi?
Until I know that.
Yeah.
Coming at it from the UK tech industry, we're global from day one. It's just how technology works. Often the UK tech companies, they'll expand into Europe very quickly. Easy to do it from a UK base. So cash is king in our world, particularly for the smaller tech companies. So there's going to be a lot more red tape. Are they going to have to set up HQs in certain parts of Europe? I know several tech startups that are now relocating. So quite a few have relocated to Berlin and Paris because it's easier to go there and, do some work with the UK. The red tape costs are really unanticipated. And then finally, about 1/5 of the UK tech industry is from the EU. So with the costs associated with the registration, the tech companies will probably bear that cost. So it's a lot more in terms of cost. So I think the red tape is really an issue and it's putting a lot of our companies on the line.
John, introduce yourself and how would it affect you if there was a no-deal Brexit?
John Hardman and I pick fruit and vegetables. The tariffs probably wouldn't actually affect our industry hugely, and in fact the 35% on dairy products might actually improve the margins of dairy farmers, which would be very welcome. If we have a no-deal Brexit, I'd like to ask this question to Simon, and we have no transitional period, my workforce are 99% EU citizens. They will not have a right to work within the UK. So who is going to pick all of our fruit and vegetables?
Can I take that up, Victoria?
Yes.
Because we have, there is provision, and my colleague Kirsten Hare, who represents Angus, she's got a lot of the soft fruit picking in Scotland in her constituency. She's been really leading the drive for seasonal agricultural workers' visa schemes, and we would absolutely, in that scenario, look to do that. A no-deal scenario doesn't mean no immigration. Let's be clear about that. Immigration can, properly and democratically and accountably controlled, be a good thing in our society. And we would absolutely want to make sure that industries like yours, which are so exposed to the need for seasonal workers, can do that. This is an example of how a democratic country, under the rule of law, free to make sovereign choices, can do this, but do it in a way which means that people in Britain who have been so concerned about immigration and about the way in which we haven't had democratic control
immigration with Mrs. May's
will be able to. Well, the truth of the matter is, Mrs. May's deal isn't all wrong, but there are elements of it which are profoundly objectionable. I'm not saying that everything that's in the deal is wrong. It's that the backstop provisions are deeply flawed.
But you've already put a scheme in place for 2,500 people for seasonal agricultural workers to pick fruit and vegetables in an industry that needs tens of thousands of people.
And we
have 11 Mondays left until a potential no deal. And that means we will come out without a transitional period, and I will have no workers, and you will see shortages of fruit and vegetables on supermarket shelves.
We can scale it, but also just to point out.
Sorry, what do you mean we can scale it?
Any scheme that the government creates, once tested, can be rolled out at whatever level is required.
You're talking about from March the 30th onwards.
There is absolutely no question in my mind that the Home Office will be capable of devising a scheme which is capable of supplying the volume of labour.
Are you joking me? No, I'm sorry. You said that with a straight face.
Look, there's no question in my mind whatsoever that we can have, as a sovereign country, one of the most capable.
Of course, eventually, but not like that.
We are the 5th most powerful country on the planet in terms of our economic scale. No, I'm afraid this is classic Project Fear. The idea that we cannot create a visa scheme for fruit workers.
Of course, the Home Office can create a visa scheme for fruit and vegetable pickers. Of course, over time.
Well, not over a great length of time.
Well, how long?
Well, I mean, look, the truth is you have to consult the Home Office civil servants about this. But yeah, I'm sorry, but we are simply not in a situation where we're going to end up talking down our abilities to do things as a country in the way that you are. This is absolutely emblematic of the way in which so much of this campaign is talked about.
Hang on. There's no point all talking at the same time. Who hasn't spoken yet? Sam, introduce yourself. Hello.
Hi, so I'm Samuel Marakchi. I'm the chairman of the Gibraltar Socialist Labour Party Students Group. So a no deal for us especially is not the ideal scenario. And you know, I'd like to ask Simon, just in terms of Gibraltar, we have so many, intrinsic links with the EU. So we've got thousands of cross-border workers coming in on a day-to-day basis. We've got trucks with food that come down from the UK through France, through Spain and into Gibraltar. And also in terms of students, I have friends in my group that, you know, they study in Brussels, some have studied in Copenhagen, some have studied elsewhere in the EU. And for them, it's important that they want to know what's going to happen. And with a no deal, unfortunately, it's the scenario that's accompanied by most uncertainty. And I don't know how that can be sold to the people of the UK as something that's positive.
Well, there's no question at all that Gibraltar is an integral part of the United Kingdom's territorial legacy, and obviously we want to make sure that there is a smooth deal. But we've seen over the last few weeks, for example, Spain in the last few days has conceded that the rights of UK citizens living there would be upheld in all scenarios. And this is reflective of the fact that once you are on this path, once it indeed becomes settled policy, then of course sensible arrangements will be made. The idea that we are going to cut off our noses to spite our face.
Do you think that will happen?
Well, I do believe that will happen. Actually, to take up the point about Gibraltar, I think in many ways the real risk about Gibraltar is that if we end up in the backstop, which I think is a real risk, a real danger, and I don't think anyone can deny it's certainly a serious possibility, the price we pay to exit the backstop is what really exercises me. So we heard from President Macron about how he would leverage access by the French to UK fishing waters as part of the price for leaving. We know the Spanish are sniffing around Gibraltar. I'm absolutely clear in my mind that we run the risk.
Disagreement.
We run the risk of allowing the Spanish to leverage Gibraltar if we end up in the backstop.
If Vicky Ford, if the government decides no deal is their settled policy, as Simon Clarke.
The government has been very clear that no deal is not the settled policy.
There's no way you say
the government is very clear that no deal is not government policy. Absolutely. So there are a huge number of risks to no deal, to people's jobs, to their lives, to Gibraltar, to Northern Ireland. No deal delivers for the fishing industry. It takes us out of the EU, it represents, and it gives that transition for the tech sector that you've mentioned and other companies. This is why I think it is so irresponsible. There's a vast amount in this withdrawal agreement that meets all of those issues. There are concerns about the risks of the backstop, but it cannot become a permanent situation, that backstop, because it would be challenged in the EU courts. The Attorney General's made that very, very clear. That is why I will be voting for this, because I don't want to put people's jobs, their businesses, their livelihoods at risk.
Let me read some messages.
I think we need to have that withdrawal agreement.
Helen says, the prospect of a no-deal Brexit terrifies me. What will happen in Northern Ireland? How will the NHS cope? How many jobs will be lost? What will happen at UK borders? It seems utter madness. Instead of thinking about their own political power, MPs should act in the best interests of their country. This whole debacle is going to have serious consequences for real people. It shouldn't be about point scoring. Frank tweets this: I'm not anxious, excited, but I am bloody angry and frustrated that we, the electorate, have to rely on a bunch of incompetent, arguing school kids. Parliament, you asked us, we told you, don't ask again, get the job done. Kate, do you want a no-deal Brexit?
I don't want a no-deal Brexit because I take about 17 medications a day, and at the moment what's happened is, for instance, last month my husband went to collect my medications and one medication wasn't available, and the pharmacist said that it wasn't a manufacturing problem, it was due to a problem with stockpiling somewhere along the system. And he went to 6 pharmacists before he got that medication. Now, I rely on a balance of those medications to control my condition so that it doesn't deteriorate. I also rely on them to control the pain that I'm in. But I just thought, I got extremely worried. I just thought of the people who actually rely on their medications to survive, and how they would cope.
And so when the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says there will be unhindered supplies of drugs, why aren't you reassured?
I'm not reassured because I also saw a report on the 18th of December on the BBC which said that a lot of GPs and pharmacists are also starting to suffer from supplies. And then I looked it up on the web, and there's a report that the distributors of drugs had given to MPs, a select committee, and they had warned that it's like a cog, it's like a large machine to supply drugs, and if you interrupt it, everything, a little cog goes and the whole system falls.
Simon Clarke, are you going to tell Kate? She's got absolutely nothing to worry about.
I am going to do that because I think it's really important that look, I understand the concerns about medicines. My son has a peanut allergy, so he needs, for example, to access, all the medicines for that. And look, there's no question at all that in the scenario where we leave the European Union without a deal, we will maintain medicines access. I think there will be lots of people watching this programme who, like you, share that concern. I do want to say that, because this is literally a matter of life and death. I really do get that. Under no scenario are we not going to be able to supply medicines. that really is a copper-bottom government guarantee. We've heard it from the Health Secretary just this week, reiterating it again, that please do not be taken in by those who want to scare us. Because, that really is scaremongering.
Rupert Huck, as a Labour politician, are you going to scare Kate and say you don't believe in Matt Hancock's reassurances?
I think Kate has some very real concerns. Insulin, drugs like that, come from Europe. And we've turned... This whole thing has made our country, a great nation, into a bit of a dad's army type of farce. We've turned into the biggest buyer of fridges at the moment. We've seen this week no-deal planning with lorries turning Kent into a car park in case that should happen. They're saying, because of Dover. I went to Dover to have a look on an MP's delegation, and they showed us the roll-on, roll-off traffic of the ferries. They come off in seconds. There's no space for any checking infrastructure. Just a couple of seconds delay makes 17-mile tailbacks on the M20. It happened in 2015. So, all this... And also, WTO, there are no normal countries that trade on those. A couple of failed states, maybe, Yemen and Venezuela. It's just not a normal thing. And if you look at someone like Trump, Trump is trying to undermine the WTO. He's called it. Look, we're all in a Venn diagram. Some things we're agreed on, but you see, I'm not going to vote for your shabby deal either. We used to talk about a blindfold Brexit. A lot of this deal is fill in the blanks. We know that we're paying 39 billion for not very much, for bugger all. Oh, sorry, is it too early to say that? But, now we've also got added to that a blackmail Brexit, because she's saying it's my rubbish deal or nothing. And it doesn't have to be like that. There is not parliamentary agreement for that deal. So in that case, MPs can't decide what they're doing. Why not fling it back to the people and see, do you want this? Or do you want what we've got?
You don't believe in democracy if you
let's have a check. And if it's a good deal, what are you scared of, Vicky? People will vote for it.
So, as many of our guests here...
a decision as big as this, it's only fair and democratic.
The true voice of the Labour Party, ladies and gentlemen.
As many of our guests here have been describing, our exit from the European Union won't just affect businesses, but also our everyday lives. We talked about medicines. Here are some of the other ways a no-deal Brexit could affect people.
Our relationship with the EU is a complex one, built on 40 years' worth of rules and regulations. 3 million EU citizens now live here, with another million from the UK living in mainland Europe. After a no-deal Brexit, their rights would be less clear. No one would be forced to leave, but in theory, healthcare, pensions and some benefits could be affected. British citizens travelling abroad to Europe won't need a visa, at least for a short visit. Though a €7 charge to travel to the EU would probably be brought in, whether there is a Brexit deal or not. One of the most difficult areas is the land border between Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and the Republic, part of the EU. Under no deal, some think there would have to be a form of customs checks to stop goods crossing over without paying tariffs. That's something both countries are desperate to avoid, not least because it could damage the peace process. EU rules also affect things like driving licences. The government says our current card might not be valid abroad, and we might have to get an international driving licence for some European countries. Then there are other schemes like pet passports, mobile phone roaming charges and landing rights for aircraft, all areas that may have to be renegotiated if we leave with no deal in March.
By the way, we've had this email from Andreas. The man claiming that a no-deal Brexit would bring opportunities to the aviation industry, that's you, Harry, is deluded. He says, I'm an airline pilot in one of Europe's biggest airlines, which carries 4 million passengers a year from Gatwick alone. Not one airline CEO would agree with him. A no-deal Brexit would mean that the UK automatically loses its membership of the European Aviation Safety Agency, which means my UK pilot licence and that of my colleagues immediately becomes invalid on the EU-registered aircraft that we operate. Right, I'm aware that some of you haven't yet spoken. Good morning.
Hi, I'm
Do
Chloe.
introduce yourself.
I'm Chloe. I'm on a gap year before I go to study PP at university. I just wanted to come back on that comment about the flights. There's a lot of scaremongering over no deal, that if we leave with no deal, there are going to be no agreements whatsoever. That's not the case. It just means there's not one formal unified agreement. It's in the EU's interest for planes to fly on the 30th of March after we leave the EU. It's in their interest to make agreements so that their citizens' rights are guaranteed here. There are going to be lots of small agreements, but they're actually going to have to make compromises rather than bullying us into a bad deal.
Yeah. Do you agree with Chloe?
Yes, I do. Lorraine Parkinson. Hi, I work within the field of project management and business improvement. As a project, this has been what I can euphemistically call a dog's breakfast. Nobody can even think, who works in that area, of how you can actually manage something that we can get to T-minus 78 days, and we have mitigated a lot of risks. I looked on the government.uk website, which actually lists a lot of what we're talking about today, about what will happen if there is a no deal. And they have actually stated that, for example, emissions and the Kyoto Agreement, we're going to follow through on that. Pets, there's going to be some sort of arrangements on that. So a lot of this has come out. There are things that are maybe not formally, but they have actually mentioned to anybody who wants to look on that website that there are going to be arrangements in place. And as my colleague has said here, it's in the EU's best interest, and that's what we're not getting a lot of. We're not getting a balanced argument. What is the EU going to lose on March the 30th?
Kevin, can you answer Lorraine's point? It's in the EU's interest to keep things going, to keep planes flying, all the rest of it, even if there's no deal. What do you say to that, Kevin?
Me personally?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to think that planes can't fly and people won't be able to transit countries and we won't be able to do our jobs. But when there's no clarification and there's no time to plan, and, you know, it's interesting when Simon, I'm fed up of seeing politicians with smug looks on the face when they're talking to people about medicines and stuff like this. I've sat in meetings last summer with the Department of Transport and Chris Grayling, and the two major concerns were getting medicines into the UK for people and the food chain. We have no clarification, and there's 77 days to Brexit, how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? You've got a pilot. You've got a pilot in 77 days who doesn't know whether he'll be able to do what he does.
You refer to that conversation. That was indeed last summer. Look, the Health Secretary has been making very, very clear preparations. I really don't think it's helpful. No, look, it is really not helpful or healthy for people watching this programme to be scared about people dying.
I'm not scared.
This is not a rational or healthy debate. It really is not. In the look, it is. This really is now going to be leaving vulnerable people watching this programme scared, and it's not founded in reality.
So you're guaranteeing that freight will move medicines and foodstuffs will move across the chain? I'll tell you what, I hope you're right. I do hope you're right.
The British government, that will not happen.
Could you ask the British government to give us some clarification how we're going to do that? Because I'm in logistics, and I speak to people in logistics every day, and we're no further on than we were a year ago. How we're going to be able to do our job, which is to be able to deliver medicines and foodstuffs to the British public.
Right, Vicky Ford wants to come in at this point.
The government's doing a lot of planning towards no deal, but there are huge risks. And anyone who says it's in the EU's interest to then agree something else, please remember that come mid-April, the European Parliament goes into shutdown up to the European elections. You then will have another 6 months to another European Commission. They can't agree new laws overnight.
Are we saying it's no blinks
this
first?
is why the transition period is so important, and why those elements of the withdrawal agreement to give us the time to negotiate the long-term relationship are so important.
Okay.
I know Rupert wants more detail on the long-term relationship, and this is important. But the EU has said until we agree the withdrawal agreement, we cannot get that detail. So please, Rupert, we're reaching out across the chamber. Please let us know what more detail you want in the long-term relationship. Let's work that out. But please, let's get this withdrawal agreement through.
I want to pause. I do apologise for interrupting. I want to pause that because I want to bring you this short interview, if I may, because I'm really interested in your views on this. One of the protesters who's been criticised this week for verbally abusing MPs as they walk into Parliament has told this programme exclusively that he will keep harassing them if he doesn't get Brexit. The man didn't want to give us his real name. We understand he's called Andy Allen. He was one of those who pursued Conservative MP Anna Soubry on Monday after chanting abuse at her during a live TV interview. And he's one of that small cluster outside Parliament who claims to be part of the so-called Yellow Vest movement. He says he began turning up at Parliament recently and has known the leader of the group, James Goddard, for about 8 months. He says he was inspired to become an activist because of Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, a far-right activist, and says although he's a supporter of Tommy Robinson, he insists he's just a normal bloke fighting for Brexit not to be overturned. He told our reporter Noel Phillips that it's legitimate for MPs to be harassed if they attempt to stop Brexit, and they'll keep on doing it if they don't get their way.
The police are continuing to investigate whether any criminal offence was committed when a Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, was called a Nazi by pro-Brexit protesters outside Parliament. This was one of the protesters who surrounded the prominent Remain campaigner. He didn't give us his name, but we understand he is called Andy Allen. Andy has posted offensive content about the London Mayor Sadiq Khan and are bulldozing all mosques on his Facebook page.
She was laughing. She wasn't all wanced up. The police wasn't nowhere, were they? It started all peaceful, then it just all kicked off. And we only challenged her across the road.
Yeah, but it's not acceptable.
But it's just spare a moment. We just saw her go over there, and that's why we went after her, and things escalated.
Do you think you're ramping up tensions by being here and approaching politicians?
I mean, they've been there 18 months. It's only like about 2-3 weeks before Christmas, me and other people come down there, and they don't like it. They put all these banners around here. Look, all the EU flags everywhere. And they're allowed to do that.
Some politicians who feel afraid.
They're not. It's not a bloody joke. What's her name? The one who got murdered. Nothing like that.
But her voice is worth more than 17.4 million.
This is 29-year-old James Goddard, a friend of Steve's, who is said to be a far-right activist with a reputation for heckling and intimidating politicians.
The way in which you went about protesting on Monday, ambushing an MP, chasing her down the street, shouting, swear words at her. I mean, that was not acceptable, though.
I know, but she gives it out. She's got to take it.
Yeah, but it's not right.
Well, she came out yesterday and she done the same thing again. So she's not frightened, is she? She came out of Parliament there yesterday, walked down, there's about 80 She likes the media, doesn't she? Even most of her own party don't like her, do they? I mean, she's only got about 800 majority in her own. She'll get voted out next general election, won't she? Even her own Tories don't like her. I mean, people in the borough voted out and she wants a second referendum, doesn't she?
Andy Allen says he joined a so-called Yellow Vest movement 6 months ago. It is believed the group has around 30 members.
I've never been like this in my life. It started off with Tommy Robinson last year. I mean, he got arrested. He got down for 13 months, didn't he? Put in prison, wasn't he? Within 4 hours. Other people get away with murder in this country. To compare us with Joe Cox killer, that's out of order. But I wouldn't, hey.
You've been described as a fascist.
Yeah, I know. We're
I mean, are you guys right-wing
Can you
racists?
see us all fascists? Just normal working people. We've been peaceful for too long. We waited 2.5 years. They're just slowing it down all the time, aren't they? They're slowing it down, aren't they? Last night she lost another vote, didn't she? What's going to happen next Tuesday? Can you tell me what's going to happen next Tuesday? She lose the vote and we won't go March the 20th. It's going to go on for another year, isn't it? People voted to come out. We've got to come out.
Will you continue harassing MPs?
Well, if we get our way, yeah. We don't get our way, innit? What's going to happen in the country?
So they're going to carry on. We've got 3 politicians here. They're going to carry on until they get Brexit. Vicky Ford, what do you say to someone like Andy Allen?
Well, I'd say to him that Leave won the referendum. The withdrawal agreement is a way to make sure that we leave the EU, but in an orderly way, and that's what I will be supporting because I think all the other options are very high risk.
I'm afraid to say that what we saw with Anna Soubry this week was absolutely disgusting. Politicians in a democracy have to be able to say what they think without fear of physical violence and intimidation. What I would add, of course, is that this is a culture which needs to be rebutted by all parties. And, of course, when the Shadow Chancellor has encouraged the then Work and Pension Secretary Estimate Day to be lynched, you do get this climate of intimidation and thuggery.
That sort of behaviour is unacceptable. There's a media circus outside Parliament now. I think, that's what Brexit has done to our country, really. I think the government needs to rule out no deal and the people need to take back control. We need a final say on this.
Alexandra,
I think it shows one thing. We need to crack on and do something.
Yeah.
If we delay, things are just going to get worse.
Yeah.
Not just in society, but in business. We have so much uncertainty. We don't invest, we don't recruit, we don't know where we're going. Can we just make a decision? I don't think either no deal or the deal are ideal, if you pardon the pun, but we've got to move on.
Alexandra?
And expanding on your point about uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty for students at the moment. And myself, I originally studied at the University of York, but I'm currently on my year abroad in central Paris. I study at the Sorbonne University, so I've experienced a lot of, I would say, hostility from people asking me what Brexit means for the future of Europe, what it means for the future of students, what it means for the future of the Erasmus scheme. Yeah, I pose this question to you. How will future students looking to study in the EU be able to have the same opportunities that I've fortunately been able to have after Erasmus comes to an end in 2020?
You've literally got a few seconds, Vicky Ford, if you can answer that.
That's covered in the withdrawal agreement and in the long-term relationship, the issue for students. Absolutely. But if we leave with no deal, then it is uncertain.
There's no question we will indeed find ways of maintaining these schemes because, of course, European students want to study here and that will be facilitated.
I totally agree.
These programmes will
You're going to
continue.
find a way for something. People need definition. We are a nation
And
divided. We are a nation divided over every single small, tiny issue. People aren't being delivered what they were promised in 2016. It needs to go back to the people, and we need to have our say on the deal to make sure that we are getting what we want for our future.
That's
we
it.
all know a lot more now than we did in 2016, don't we?
Thank you all very much. Really appreciate you giving up so much time. And you as well. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again. Thank you. BBC Newsroom Live is next. Thanks for company. Back tomorrow at 10. Have a good day.